right now. So with that, welcome everybody. We are on the fully remote talk show, the talk show for leaders adapting their style for a remote first world. We are on episode 19. We're today talking about the effect of remote work on career development. Again, we're focusing a little bit more towards like engineering roles, but like the conversations that we're having is sort of widely applicable even beyond like the engineering roles for sure. I think the raw technical expertise only takes you so far in career development. And like we've known this in the early stages of somebody's career that like raw technical expertise takes them. But what happens after a while? Like, later stages, how do you measure impact and influence and how that affects career development? And how has that changed in this world of remote work where communication is now different? These are the things that we're going to talk about today, and who better to have talking about this than our chief guest. I'll just put her up on stage over here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
For those of you who don't know Leah, which I don't think is too many people over here, she has been an Amazon veteran for over 23 years. And we just were talking about it, is a lifetime at Amazon kind of a company. Not only she runs this company called The Voice of a Developer, she has been the voice of a developer at Amazon. I was just like researching about Leah and like the impact that she's had across the company, and like how many people have like written about it, and the testimonials over there was just so impressive that I cannot think of a better person to talk about this topic on career development in this remote first stage than Leah. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. It's an important topic right now, I think, for sure.
Awesome. I'm going to want to jump into these questions, but before we do, we usually do this check-in with the folks that are over here. Just one moment, take a break. This is an interactive show. How are you feeling today? And then just like type that word or phrase in that box over there, just to get a little bit of taking you from your daily routine and like giving a moment to be present over here with us today. How are you feeling today? Write that as well. And in a moment, we can see what's the collective feeling of this crowd that we have over here. All right. Scattered, randomized, connected, hairy, exhausted, happy. Okay. It's a mixed bag. We have a few positive emotions and feelings and like a few not so positive ones over here. This is great, but whatever feeling you have, I think the next 30 minutes or so when we're going to be talking to Leah about all these topics is going to be exciting. I encourage you all to jump in, participate, ask questions, and keep this lively. For that, I'm going to jump straight into this mode over here. I'll first probably all these research for me, I wanted you to share this with the rest of the world as well, is like, tell us a bit about the voice of the developer journey, and especially like the consultant job that you do right now. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, Voice of the Developer started as a mechanism to unify the voice of engineers, similar to the way that Amazon does it for customers, which was very unique at the time because, as everyone has probably read, Amazon is not really an employee-centric company. They're trying to work on that. But at the time when this idea for this program came out, it was a very unusual thing to think of an internal user of tools at the company as a customer. And me coming from my background, which was originally Nordstrom, and I was always in sales before, and I had grown up at Amazon and I was very customer focused. So I sort of applied that customer centric view that we, really pride ourselves at Amazon as making developers like the most important customer in the room. And my approach was a little radical. I created this SDE pain points list, and I, encouraged everybody to kind of unload their grievances on me, and I categorized them, and then slowly worked on creating the tech survey and other things to start to begin to, turn subjective viewpoints into something a bit more quantifiable or something that I could use to influence leadership to make real changes. And one of those things that turned out to be really materially impacting engineers was career development and the job leveling guidelines that Amazon had, which at the time were awarded in a way that was really affecting the way that engineers had their opportunities for progression to get to senior levels. Like it was a tough thing. And so I developed this niche expertise in these areas. And that's really why when I left Amazon, I burned out. I totally fell apart physically. I just 23 years and I just lost it. And I thought my career was over. I just figured I've blown up everything. But I was getting calls from people to advise on some of the things that I did. And I had assumed that the only company in the world that had these problems was Amazon. And because I'd been there for 23 years, I was just this one trick pony. But it turns out most companies, if not all of them, have the same problems. It's not Amazon. It's not unique to Amazon. It's unique to the subject area, which, as it turns out, is very hard. Developer productivity, developer effectiveness is very hard. Career development is hard. These are hard problems. It's always easier to be hired than promoted. And then job leveling content is universally tragic. At every company I've looked at, what they have is not great stuff. And that's really what I specialize in now, is trying to create objective statements that people can use to validate leveling and try to make the playing field a bit more even between hire and promote, or between levels, or whatever.
Awesome. I think this is a great journey and a very important topic to go into this level of detail over here. But just putting that the remote first lens over here, just tell us about what these last 2 years have been, and how that has changed this sort of the developer experience in companies, as well as what is the state of career development right now?
Well, I think everybody during the pandemic, a lot of it was just survive. Either you were in a company where you're just trying to keep the company alive because they're service oriented, or what they were selling or doing was kind of affected by the pandemic and its restrictions. And now, obviously, we have the war in Ukraine and different sanctions and things like that are going on with China, and that a lot of stuff has been hitting engineering. I think it's been very difficult. And so we all went remote, and I bet you anything. I'm not that me personally doing consulting, I've only been advising from the outside in and doing engineering culture evaluations and helping people create tech surveys and doing job leveling content. So I haven't been on the ground dealing with what companies are having to address in terms of career development for their engineers. But my guess is that it slowed down considerably during those 2 years because it wasn't front of mind. What was front of mind was just getting your job done, and obviously being on a million Zoom meetings or Chime meetings every day, whatever your conferencing solution is. But now that we move into this new world, right, where it's either hybrid or fully remote, I have grave concerns about the effect on engineering career progression for a few reasons, which I'll get into as we get into the questions. But I think that it's going to be hard for companies to deliver on career progression in a remote environment, because remote has traditionally been almost you go remote and you're not progressing. Almost nobody gets promoted when they're remote. And then when you add onto it offices that are offshoots of the main pod, the main, mother church or whatever, those, whenever you were in a, remote development center, even still working in person with people, your career progression slowed. So now take this and magnify it by us all being via video all the time, and ask yourself, are you going to be able to get to the next level? And how easy is that going to be when nobody can see what you're doing? And that's where we run into trouble.
Yeah, I think this whole remote versus hybrid thing is definitely something that I want to double click on. But I want to also ask you, why is this? What is sort of the underlying reason for remote almost being like a sort of second class experience? And what is this something inherently like sort of in the human nature of how it is? Or is there something engineering specific about this? Uh, this the reason for this happening?
Well, I mean, I think prior to the pandemic, remote was a very unusual position to get. Very few people
Mm,
could get even a hybrid relationship. I was fortunate that I negotiated it when I moved to Olympia, which was, almost 2 hours away from Seattle. And so I was lucky that I got to work remotely 3 days a week. And I personally found my productivity increased significantly by having
mm,
an ability to work from home for the majority of my time. I did some of my best work in a hybrid relationship. But what I noticed in my studies was that, we have this thing called distance bias, and it's a common bias. And whatever is closest to us, we think is more important or correct than what is
mm,
distant from us. And so when you take that, and then in engineering, I think engineering and people specifically who are more thoughtful, who maybe don't jump into every conversation and have to always say something in every meeting. Uh, those folks are going to be more disadvantaged in a remote work environment, though they may be more productive. And so they've got to find other ways to make sure that their work is seen, which is going to feel
mm,
somewhat unnatural. And in the prior to pandemic world, there just weren't enough people
mhm,
to even, I mean, you'd have like 1 out of 1,000 would be a remote, and they were probably already a pretty senior level. So it wasn't really affecting them. But now we're going to have lots of people, and some of them, lower level trying to get to their first promotion or mid-career trying to get to that senior level. And that's when you're going to start to see difficulties because you're not in the office and your teammates may not even know what you're doing. You might be checking in code, but you're not influencing anything. Design discussions are, iffy. And how are you going to show that you are demonstrating next level competencies? It's very, very challenging.
yeah, I think like you mentioned, like a very key point over here is that like different career stages can have like slightly different ways in which this remote is impacting for people. Tell us a
Hmm.
bit more about like how an early individual contributor in a company versus like an established IC, how does this affect? And also, this could be like non-engineering as well, but generally, like, how is this affecting different stages of the company?
It's a really good question. So entry level or anyone, well, entry level, let's just talk about entry level, your first
Right.
job, you maybe had some internships before. The hardest thing is going to be getting access to information. It's not
Mm-hmm.
like, sure, you get a buddy, a teammate that's been assigned to you, and maybe you slack them to death with all of your bizarre questions, which at some point you're going to start to feel self conscious about. But most managers don't take the time to really create an onboarding plan that has you meet a lot of different people to get input and information. By the time you're at the next level in your career, maybe you're starting a new job or you're starting in a new team, you already have been through this before in some way. And so it's not like you don't know how to go and find answers to questions. It's not as challenging, but it can feel really isolating. And I
Mm,
think that depending upon the type of person you are and the type of company it is and the type of team you're on, you can just feel really alone. And
mm,
and then when you have a question, if you think it's a dumb question, you may not ask that question, which means you might be stuck longer, working later, working more weekends as you try to figure out your things on your own so that you don't look stupid or you don't want anyone to perceive you as not being intelligent. Sorry, I have a cat that is wanting a lot of love right now. It's kind of annoying. Um, and uh, and so by the time you're a senior engineer, you're not really expected. Nobody expects you to have trouble with this. Like somehow you're just supposed to fly in. Doesn't matter whether it's remote or not. Magically, you're gonna through osmosis. You're gonna read the code. You're gonna know everything happening. You'll be able to spot all business logic errors. I mean, I don't think that's really true at all. But I do think that at least when you're senior, you're more likely to reach out and you'll engage, and it may or may not be useful. But I'd say that it's much harder for those early career people because they don't know who to ask. They don't know what's okay to ask, and they're more likely to be judged for asking questions that somebody thinks is pedestrian, if they do it too much. There's this idea being that you should be able to find answers to yourself. And that makes sense at a certain point, but not in your first year. And especially if the company is like Amazon, where they have a lot of, in-house built tools where they're very proprietary and they don't necessarily fit anything else that anyone's using in the industry, or you're being told to pick up a completely different language. Those are all things that are going to become, much more challenging in that remote circumstance, because you can't just go over to somebody's desk. Right.
This is great. I'm sort of like vehemently like nodding to these things because I can like sort of feel all these moments where I've felt this coming to me from like earlier on in my career to where we are right now. And I'm sure people who are watching this will like kind of feel the same as well. There's so much truth in this. This is great. Tell me one more part about this, right? Like there is like currently a lot more flexibility that's available for engineers. This might be like not the people who are early in their career, but like this might be like a great time to be in the engineer. The demand for it is still pretty high despite like all the things that's going on.
The layoffs.
Now there is like flexibility in terms of when you work, how long you work, whether you're going to be a digital nomad, whether you're going to like go back to your hometown and do this. How do you balance this? Like, it's like, well, are engineers like right now thinking about like, it's like maybe my career development might take a hit, but like I get this flexibility and this is overall in my life, this might make sense. And so what is the trend on that these days?
I don't know about the trend, but I will say that that's a very fair trade-off. And it's fine for a little while. But then what happens is you get, you could, think about it like Amazon's SDE2, which is level 5 at most companies, is very consistent. It's a super comfortable level to be at. You could be at that level your whole career. And the problem is the people next to you that you started out in your career with will get to senior. At some point, they'll go to the next level, and you will not. You'll be making choices that were great for quality of life, or to have, the types of things that you wanted to do. Maybe you didn't see yourself as wanting to move that direction, and then it becomes a little bit of an ego thing. Like I'm as good as they are. Why am I not getting promoted? And the problem is you have to position yourself for that, and you have to actually try to make it happen. And so my advice is really not to do, not, I'm not saying don't make those quality of life decisions, but check in with yourself each year and make sure that you're still not career, next level motivated, because it takes to get to those senior levels can be like a year or two. So if you delay a few years because you're having a great quality of life, well, now you're starting further in. At a certain point, sometimes, and this is the worst case scenario, if you have a manager or a management team that somehow decides that someone doesn't have next level potential, which I always think is a huge mistake that managers make. In my opinion, their job is to explain the gap between where you are and what the next level is, not make a judgment on you that you don't have the ability to get there. But there are people out there, especially in our field, who they decide when you haven't made it to a senior level by X point that somehow you'll never make it there. That's the trap. You have to be very careful of that, because it can happen where they'll go, well, why have you been an SDE2 for 10 years? And it's like, well, there could have been a million reasons why, none of which are the engineer's fault. But you get the wrong manager and they think it is the engineer's fault.
I like that. Like, I think this is not like a clear technical problem as much as like a lot to do with perception, a lot to do with like the ego that you mentioned and like the perception of where you are. And that's super important for people to be aware, because like what you make choices right now could have that lasting impact.
It really can. I mean, it really can. I mean, at Amazon, I was promoted every single year until I hit level 6. And I freaked out because it's this Peter principle thing. Like, I'm like, they're going to promote me and I'm going to fail. And I had imposter syndrome for years. So I really struggled with that. So I actually went to my management team and I said, I don't want to be promoted this year. Could you just slow down? And you know what
Mm.
happened was I spent the next decade trying to get to principal. Well, everybody went past me. It was like I could not get there. And I really screwed myself. I could have probably
Mm.
gotten higher up faster, but I put my, foot on the brake. And it probably was a good thing. It all worked out fine, but I was experiencing that. And I've watched engineers that I, coached or mentored or just, watch their careers go through the same thing. So it happens. It's real.
Yeah, this is great. And so if I want to ask like sort of a one money question over here, right? Like if you are having one of these engineers watching right now, what would you say are like one, two, or three actionable steps that somebody can take towards, like specifically for somebody who's working remotely towards their career development? What are some three actionable things that they can do?
Well, first they need to know whether or not they're interested in moving to the next level, or whether or not they they even see themselves as staying in the track that they're on. So, you don't have to be at the next level of SDE. You can become a solution architect. You can become a data engineer. There's so many wonderful directions. You could start getting into ML. You don't have to stay on the track you're on. And so you should know kind of generally whether or not it's making you happy or not. I don't think management and TPM are the only two directions. Software developers are becoming product managers now. There's a lot of really cool directions you can take. But if you are interested in getting to the next level, you need to know what the qualities are and the skills and the expectations, and you need to talk to your manager to make sure that they are aware that this is something you want. If you don't have that conversation, you have no idea whether or not the things you're working on are next level appropriate. At least if you have the conversation with your manager, you can clarify, is this project something that would be considered executing at the next level? And if they say no, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It may be that there's work to be done and it's not available right now, but it gives you a little bit more power to have a conversation and be more targeted in how am I doing relative to this, and having more of those developmental talks. And then the other thing you do need to do is you have got to start writing down what you're doing. And I was a
Yeah.
broken record on this at Amazon, but I think that in technology companies, we reorg all the time, and every manager change sets your career development back. And it's already a remote situation. And so you need to be really clear about what it is that you're accomplishing. And if that means over communicating a bit, whether it's writing weekly status reports or biweekly, don't just assume the manager is even paying attention to your check ins, or whether or not your code reviews are constructive, or you're screwing up. No, they may not even look at any of that. You have to bottle it up and put a bow on it for them, because they're dealing with whatever their lives are. And my guess is that they're doing a lot of logistics just to try to keep that ship going. And so anything you can do to help them out is beneficial to your career.
This is great. I think the top 3 points seems like very clear over here. Figure out whether you want to actually go through this career, whether you're ready, and then have the conversation, and then like start writing down things over here. Feels like very clear, actionable things that somebody can take today. Love it. Um, I'm going to jump ship over here and ask you a little bit more from like a leader's perspective or from an engineering manager's perspective over here. And folks, if you all have any questions or any thoughts, please go ahead and ask that question on the side. And I would love for you to even like raise your hand and come up and ask a question as well. So please do that. So from a leader perspective, how much like how do they set themselves up, like uncover the biases in a remote first way and like set up that remote first culture that is fair to all their engineers, because there are like these biases that exist for these people. So how do they do that?
It's challenging because you're having to develop an understanding of how someone thinks in a remote environment, which when we're in person, it's a lot more, our brain gets signals and we pick up cues differently, and we're in the office and there's a lot more that just happens through osmosis, which is why some companies are saying in the office automatically. And I can understand that. I can understand why some leaders are going that direction, because truthfully, a remote work environment exposes problematic leadership situations and areas that are weaker, and it can make the difference between them succeeding and failing. And so what does a manager do, or what does an employee do in these circumstances? It's to, it's to begin to start to have more than just tactical conversations, to start talking about strategy and theory and ideas, taking some time out of one-on-ones or meetings to just make sure people are heard. Managers should always be asking everyone for input, regardless of whether or not they choose to give it or not. And that is often missed in a meeting because we're rushing. I mean, we're always moving too quickly, and there's always someone that's dominating the conversation. And then there's like 5 people in the meeting who don't say a word. And those folks are dead in the water. Nobody hears your ideas or your input, then they don't know what you've got. They don't know who you are and what you can contribute. It makes it very hard to have a career development or even to be perceived as a great performer when you're sitting silently. And I think remote makes that harder and easier all at the same time. I mean, yeah, as an introvert, I love remote. I am super productive. I don't have to talk to anybody, and it's typically one-on-one, and I'm not in a meeting situation. But I have to work very hard to be thoughtful about my contributions, because if I over contribute, I'm that person. And if I under contribute, then they don't know who I am.
Wow, this is a much more harder problem right now with like leaders as well. And so, are there any good tools or framework that have come handy for like leaders to make this happen, or processes even to ensure like fairness in how they do deal with like remote first employees as opposed to like people who are in house?
Well, whatever they do, it's pretty simple. It's just to make sure that you hear from everybody when you're having a team meeting, or that you're taking the time to pass down information so that everybody has the same, playing field, that they're all being communicated with. I actually am a huge fan. I advise a company called UpLevel, which are their developer metrics. And this is a controversial area. I mean, quantifiable development stuff is, quantifiable, right? There's so much context that's not there. But what I really like about UpLevel and about these companies that do something similar is that, but UpLevel specifically, they show when you're being randomized, they show when you're having focus time, they can give a manager some perspective over how the person's working and whether or not they're working all hours of the night, and in addition to these other metrics. And that kind of stuff is a great way to kind of have a conversation and poke at like what's someone doing. So, there are people out there that they tend to kind of have their hands in a lot of things, and maybe focus is an issue for them. And this is a way for a manager to stay engaged on that. I mean, managers can't phone it in like they could in an in-person. When there's a remote employee, they have to try a little harder, and the remote employee has to try a little harder. And then if there's a time zone in the mix, well, now you're talking about cross time zone stuff. And if you're managing people who are both in Asia and in India, you're talking about all hours of the day, and it's got to be fair,
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I like that framework, and you rightly said like like the immediate thought of like sort of quantifiable metrics is always like sort of makes people
it makes
icky,
you
but at
cringe,
the same,
right? It's like,
yeah,
oh,
exactly,
I don't want to see cycle time or my check-ins or how many lines of code or any of this. I mean, it's all crap,
exactly.
right? But the truth is that, when you put it all together, along with deep work and focus time and randomization, it provides a little bit more of a discussion about, am I working on the right things? Am I doing? And the manager has a dashboard in front of them that can be used to start those conversations versus just nothing. Right. Yep. It's like, at least there's something,
Yep. And yeah, the flip side of it is like, if you don't measure things, yeah, how are you going to improve if you don't measure things, right? Like, so yeah, I think like that makes a lot of sense. We're coming close to the end of this, and I want to shift gears and like ask the last couple of questions around like meetings, because I feel like, it's like that's sort of the place where most of these sort of impact and influence and like your potential and like being able to like showcase that and everything comes together. So how should like engineers, ICs, like sort of represent themselves in the meetings? And so also the flip side of it is like, what kind of meeting culture should like good leaders enforce?
So I think the most important things for engineers to do is to, especially if you have, I mean, a lot of the meetings, especially with them all being remote all the time, is you're multitasking. So you might be writing a little bit of code, you might check in a monitor, you might be looking at Slack, you might be doing a bunch of things. Heck, I mean, I've even played a game while I've been on a meeting before because everybody's just sitting there talking and it didn't have anything to do with me. I think, unfortunately, it can be very easy to cause yourself to multitask. And I would actually say that the minute you find yourself disengaging and going and starting to do these other things, you have to ask yourself, am I in this meeting appropriately? And if so, then I either need to pay attention because there's an opportunity that could come up where maybe my input would be useful. But also, it's just good to listen to your teammates and be respectful and to know what's going on. And I think our tendency is to be doing a couple of things at the same time, and we're shooting ourselves in the foot when we do so. There was this guy that worked at Amazon for a long time, John Rouser, who would say, don't bring your cell phone to meetings, or don't bring your laptop to meetings. And he had this view about it. It was pretty debatable. But his idea being, if you go to a meeting, you're going to pay attention. And if you don't think you should have been in that meeting, then have a conversation with your manager to say, why am I being invited to all of these? I don't see any value in it. And have that conversation. But what is really important for career development is that in order to achieve senior levels, you have to be able to communicate your ideas and solutions. You have to. And often those meetings are the only place it happens. And if you are a little bit more reluctant to speak in a group situation, or there isn't a way for you to do so, you're really hamstrung. And this is the challenge of being in a remote first situation. See, in a hybrid situation, you can get your ideas across when you're in the office and you can find a way to make it happen. But when you're only remote, then it's only the time when they're on those meetings that you have that opportunity, unless you write it out, put it in an email, or write it at Amazon, write a paper, do whatever it takes to get your views out there and to begin to influence, because otherwise you won't be seen as being able to handle a critical competency that is required of senior engineers, right?
I love that. I think I love the first point that you made around like how people these days come to meeting to escape rather than engage. And it's so easy to do that in a remote context because you have so many ways in which you're like a one click away from that awesome Twitter post that somebody's posting. So yeah, it's easy to escape. And so I think I love that a lot. And it's also like sort of personally resonating because like a lot of what we're doing here at Zinc is to see how we can change that part of it for sure. And then your other point as well around like how do you communicate and like transfer your ideas and like put your ideas out there. And that's a great point as well. I saw Paulina had lifted her hand. I'm going to bring her up on stage before we sort of wrap this up over here. Paulina.
Thank you. I just had a question, Leah, that it was, do you think it's a stopper to work remotely more for men or for women? Because I live in Latin America. I have been working remotely for the past, now it's 10 years. It's before the pandemic, that was something really strange, right? But now it has a little bit more. My husband, for example, this is the first time for him being remote, and he doesn't like it because he feels, like you say, that he's not being seen, right? He's in sales. It's another, but I don't know if it's like, for me, it's good to have a job being remotely, being able to be at home, taking my time if I need to take my kids to the doctors. I don't know how it's actually over there. Does it change genderly or?
Well, I mean, I don't know if by gender. I mean, I think that I've heard from women engineers who have felt like this is like the best thing ever, because now they can kind of work, and they can work at their own cadence, and they can jump out to take care of a kid or get some dinner on or do whatever. And it's awesome, though it extends the workday. And I think that it is contributing to a form of burnout, which is dangerous. And but where men are concerned, that may be just as great for them too. It just comes down to the individual and whether or not they like getting a break from home, or they like some people love to be in the office. They love the social of it. They like getting away. But, if you're going to spend an hour commuting in traffic each way, that's 2 hours of your life that you're losing. So I actually love that we have moved to a world where now there are so many companies offering remote. I think that's phenomenal. And I love companies like Airbnb and others that are saying, hey, we're going to try this. We're going to say you can work anywhere in the world, and we're going to figure it out. And there's other companies that are sort of saying, why can't we solve this problem, right? We've obviously been able to be successful for 2 years working remotely. Why do we all have to go back in the office? But the danger is when you have a company where you're going to have people in there full time in the office, hybrids, and then remote first people. I will bet you that you will have a harder time fully remote and getting to the next level. I think it will be very challenging. Once you're at a certain point in your career, you can pull back and do remote, and it's fine because you're not really expecting to be promoted. Maybe once you're already a senior or a principal or a lead or whatever. But if you're on your upward slope, you may want to pick a hybrid or an in-office experience to get the best shake at it. And that's really because the danger is you can languish. And also you can be in an echo chamber just with yourself, thinking you're just the greatest in the world, and not getting the exposure to senior engineers that you would in the office, that would challenge you, that might expose you to different ideas, to get opportunities to attend talks. How much are people attending remote talks when they're already on meetings all the time? And so I think there's upskilling things that they're missing out on. Conferences and networking, all of these things are really important to career. And I don't know how that's going to work fully unless you're already kind of at the pinnacle that you want to be at. And then it's great. You can check out a little bit. I'm not saying work from home. I'm saying legitimately work remotely.
Awesome. Great question. Thanks so much, Paulina, for asking this, and I appreciate the answer. This has been fantastic. We are coming close to an end of this. And before we wrap this up, I want to just announce next week's episode. We're talking to Scott, who is the VP of Communications in the Business Council at Alberta. He's been spending a lot of time researching on remote work for non-tech companies, specifically about companies that have an established in-person culture and how they are adapting. And so we're going to bring Scott on the show next week and talk a lot about that.
Another scene. We can still see Leah.
Oh, is that right? Okay. Maybe something's off over here.
I can see it. I can see this.
You can see the poster? Okay.
No. The poster for next week?
Yeah.
I don't see it.
Okay. Maybe there is some latency over there, but good to know. So yeah, but so that's what we have for next week. And with that, I'm going to come to a wrap of this show. Thank you so much, Leah, for joining us over here.
Joining.
For folks who are here, please go ahead and share what your top takeaway for this is. Appreciate your time, Leah. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really great. Appreciate it.
Yeah, maybe you can tell us a quick word about like what your experience on being on the Zinc talk show was for you.
For this, oh, I think it was lovely. I mean, you really organized it in such a great way, and it was really consistent, and keeping it at a time, like just half an hour. I mean, it's really, really effective.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I will share the recording with you, Leah. And like, this was fantastic talking to you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.